Hey, everybody. It is Tuesday, February 4th. You're listening to the Mo News Podcast. I'm Moshe Manunu.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. Here to report the colonoscopy, Jill, went well. Appreciate everyone's messages, well wishes. And it's important to get the information out there. I heard from a lot of people who had family members, friends impacted by colon cancer in their 30s and their 40s, some with an early discovery that led to treatment, some discovering it too late, sadly. So it's important to get out there and get checked, meet with your doctor, and push and nudge if you have family history, even if they tell you like, oh, you can wait a while.
Moshe, you're the next Katie Couric.
Famously, Katie Couric did her colonoscopy live on television. So maybe that's the next time we got to do this. We'll do it on the pod.
I have to get them every 2 years, so
you're next.
Maybe we'll see. Here's the opportunity. All right, Moshe, I'm glad that all went well, and let's get to some news here.
Jill, the natural transition is, speaking of colonoscopies, or what feels like a colonoscopy these days, the news cycle.
No, colonoscopies are more pleasant, actually. You're asleep for the whole thing. It's lovely. Okay, our top story. With hours to spare, Donald Trump pauses Mexico and Canada tariffs for 1 month after he comes to agreements with both of those countries' leaders to beef up security at the border, and another agreement in Panama, this led by Secretary of State Marco Rubio. We'll talk about how Trump's threats have led to frustrations and anxiety and a roller coaster ride in the markets, but have also led some countries to agree to some of his demands.
All part of his plan.
Meanwhile, the fight over the fate of the USAID agency, as Democratic members of Congress protested Monday and tried to enter an office building to see what billionaire Elon Musk is actually up to. It comes as Secretary of State Marco Rubio announces he is the new acting director of USAID. What it all means for the next potential Trump-Musk target, the Department of Education. And the first foreign leader to visit Donald Trump at the White House, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. What to expect? Plus, will climate change wipe away $1.5 trillion in U.S. home values? One study suggests that people will be paying more for homeowners insurance and moving out of more risky regions. And the White House announced the creation of the U.S.'s first sovereign wealth fund. What exactly will it be used for? And we didn't get a chance to talk Grammys yesterday, Moshe, but Beyoncé finally won Album of the Year and is announcing some new tour dates. Adding to her shelf, or I should say shelves of Grammys. And Moshe is on this day in history.
Jill, on this day in history, what I would argue might be one of the best instrumental intros in a rock song released on this day.
Okay, let's start with the roller coaster ride that is Washington, D.C. these days. Hours before the deadline last night, Canada and Mexico brokered a deal with President Trump to avoid sweeping 25% tariffs on imports that he announced over the weekend. So the deals avert a trade war, at least until March. Trump's proposed tariffs on both of our neighbors will now be paused for the next 30 days as the countries try to work together on Trump's goals to secure U.S. borders and limit the amount of fentanyl coming into the country. When he initially threatened tariffs on Canada and Mexico, it wasn't exactly clear which demands he was making of the two countries. He mentioned he wanted more done on trade, the border, and cutting down on fentanyl. But yesterday, after speaking to both countries' leaders, both Mexico and Canada announced more enforcement at the borders in exchange for a 1-month tariff delay. So first up on Monday morning, he spoke with Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum. On Truth Social, he called it a friendly conversation where she agreed to immediately supply 10,000 Mexican soldiers at the border, which separates Mexico and the U.S. Sheinbaum says the U.S. will also be expected to prevent weapons trafficking from the U.S. to Mexico as part of that agreement.
Yeah, this is a major part of it that the Mexicans have always been concerned about, which is the amount of guns that come from the U.S. Into the hands of the cartels. So they've always said one of the issues related to drugs is all the weapons coming across from your side of the border. And so ultimately, it looks like both sides made some promises there.
Meanwhile, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau spoke with Donald Trump Monday afternoon and also reported a good call. Like Mexico, Canada's promised nearly 10,000 frontline officials at the border. Trudeau saying Canada will implement a $1.3 billion border plan, including new choppers, technology, and personnel to help keep the border safe. And he announced the appointment of a fentanyl czar who will designate cartels as terrorists. More than $140 million towards fighting on fentanyl and help launch a joint U.S.-Canada strike force to combat organized crime and fentanyl and money laundering. Opioids, by the way, also killing Canadians.
Yeah, that's something Trudeau has been saying, that we're all impacted by this. But some additional promises there. Trudeau actually had announced that border plan back in December. He now moves ahead with implementing it. But the fentanyl czar and some of those promises, those are new. So he announced over the weekend, Donald Trump, 3 tariff targets, right? Canada, Mexico, and China. Canada and Mexico are delayed. As of right now, it looks like the 10% tariffs, across the board tariffs on China, are set to go into effect today, though there have been sort of negotiations happening. So look out for a potential headline there as well. What's significant there is we do have a number of tariffs already against China, but they're very kind of specifically focused on certain sectors. That's always the history of tariffs here. Across the board tariffs, that's a new thing, relatively new, that Trump is introducing, especially from an American perspective. Trump had actually said over the summer during the campaign that he was thinking about 60% tariffs on all Chinese goods. He, on Monday, described this initial 10% tariff as a, quote, opening salvo. The issue in particular here, again, fentanyl. China is the primary source of the precursor chemicals that are synthesized into fentanyl by the drug cartels in Mexico. China's taken some steps to crack down on those chemicals over the years, been subject to negotiations during the first Trump term, during the Biden term. China pushed back on these tariffs over the weekend, though there are some back-channel talks. China's talked about suing the U.S. in the World Trade Organization over this, taking their own countermeasures. And that's the thing about China. People ask, like, wait, 25% on Canada, but only 10% on China. What's that about? Well, it's easier to punch down on Canada, given the size of the Chinese economy and the counters that they have and how much they can create pain for Americans, given the size of the Chinese economy here. But it does appear that they're poised right now, the Chinese are poised to make some sort of deal here. They're working on a proposal, and ultimately there was a deal in that first term to trim some of the tariffs, and that's a bit of what we're watching here. Jill, we told you in the podcast yesterday, the one thing to watch was the stock market. And there was major market reaction Sunday night into Monday morning. Started out as a pretty rough day abroad as well as on Wall Street.
Yeah, U.S. stocks initially dropped Monday morning amid fears of a full-blown trade war that could upend supply chains and cause rapid inflation. But they slowly recovered throughout the day yesterday after the U.S. and Mexico announced the one-month pause. The Dow finished down just 123 points, or about 0.3%, as opposed to earlier losses of 665 points. Most, to be honest, as somebody who spent a lot of time covering the markets on Wall Street, I was actually expecting that the markets would be down even more than that.
Yeah, I think there was a very cautious outlook on this, even with the tariffs announced, that some sort of deal would happen here. I mean, you talk to economists, you talk to business leaders, and the presumption is that Trump is using these tariffs as a tactic, as leverage, and not intending to make these go long term. Remember, one of the industries that was going to be the most hard hit here, auto companies. GM shares fell by 5%, Ford by 4%, because of the way that parts and cars travel across our borders multiple times. So we're going to see major increases when it comes to the price of vehicles. That was one of the concerns here. Again, the way tariffs work is they're effectively a tax on importers that are typically passed along to us, the consumer. And that's why there's been so much concern that these tariffs were going to create inflation here. So you have these short-term deals, investors, again, saying this is just, Trump's negotiation tactic, not actual policy. But then investors were caught off guard when they're like, oh, man, he actually did it this weekend. They're real. And so they were sort of like, well, let's sell off. But how long is this really going to last? In this case, never really started, at least in the case of Canada and Mexico. We'll watch the China thing. But it does go to show you how Trump is utilizing tariff threats and then now actual tariff announcements to get his way. He's been accused by allies and others of bullying, saying this could have longer-term effects on U.S. relationships, the lack of trust around the world. Yes, but when you look at it, his tariff threats or tariff announcements so far in his first few weeks here have been pretty successful, right? This is his perspective here. He made a tariff threat against Colombia when they wouldn't take deportees, migrants, they were saying them. Said, I will launch tariffs on you. And they said, okay. We'll take the migrants. Then you had the Mexico and Canada announcements over the weekend, right? And then they struck deals, and he feels that he was able to get some concessions out of them. Next up, he says, is the EU, the European Union, one of our largest trading partners. He says that they treat us unfairly. So look out for potential tariff announcements against Europe coming up very soon here. We'll see what happens there. He's also threatened tariffs against Denmark because they won't sell the U.S. Greenland. And then, as we've been telling you lately, he's been talking about taking over the Panama Canal again, saying that we're being untreated fairly by Panama. And he also wants Chinese control away from Panama. So he hasn't officially announced a tariff threat, but he might not need to based on a big trip that happened over the weekend.
Yeah, on that note, Secretary of State Marco Rubio's first trip abroad this weekend was to Panama. It ended with Panama's president vowing to end a key development deal with China. Rubio met with President Jose Raul Molino and expressed concerns from Trump that Panama was giving too much control of the Panama Canal to its Chinese adversaries. This after Trump repeatedly said that the U.S. was going to take control of the canal that he believes is rightfully ours. Molino asserted Panama's sovereignty over the canal, a crucial 51-mile waterway that connects the Pacific Ocean and the Caribbean Sea. But he also told Rubio he will not renew a 2017 agreement to join China's Belt and Road Initiative. That's where China was looking to invest in lower-income countries and assert control. Instead, Panama vowed to work more closely with the United States.
Yeah, Belt and Road is what China does around the world to basically lock in countries. They build them new highways, new facilities, new hospitals, a whole variety of things, and then you owe China. It's the way China works with countries around the world, trying to counter American influence. But you see, Panama, actually, they even said, they're like, how can we get out of this deal early? So clearly the threats here from Trump were effective. Rubio promising U.S. action if Panama didn't do more. We should note the Panama Canal, vital for U.S. vessels. 72% of all vessels that travel through the Panama Canal are coming or going from the U.S. Because, again, it's the quickest route to go from the West Coast to the East Coast by sea. Otherwise, you got to go all the way around South America. Now, Trump has talked about taking back the canal. The U.S. originally built the canal 100 years ago. Eventually, during the Carter administration, agreed to give it back to Panama. But Trump has said that that was the worst deal ever, and he wants it back. It appears here he's getting some concessions here that would not lead to U.S. troops invading Panama to take back the canal. That's effectively what you need to do. So again, Trump's threats here and rhetoric, effective so far. Again, we can talk about the process, we can talk about the diplomacy, we can talk about the trust in the U.S., all the various things critics bring up here. But he will tell you, and his fans will tell you, well, he's getting things done. I don't care how he does it. We're going to talk about this Thursday night. We're doing a Mo News Premium workshop. If you're a Mo News Premium member, you've probably been to this in the fall. We'll be doing them on a variety of topics throughout the year. We're going to begin this Thursday evening on all things, I guess what they're calling, Jill, the Don Roe Doctrine, like Monroe Doctrine, but Donald Trump, Don Roe Doctrine, looking in Greenland. He keeps calling Canada the 51st state, Panama Canal. We'll dive into all of that. What unfolded this week? That is over on Mo News Premium. We're going to send you the workshop deals. We're going to send you the workshop details. You can, if you're not a member yet, go to mo.news/premium. There's a 2-week free trial, and you can see what it's like when you join this workshop Thursday night.
Okay, staying in Washington, big developments on the moves by Elon Musk to get embedded across the U.S. government and increasing access to personnel, data, and financial systems. So let's start with the standoff between the U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID, and Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE.
Really, it's appearing like it's less of a standoff, Jill, and more like a complete takeover of the U.S. Development Agency.
So yesterday we saw some huge changes to the agency, which now appears to be folding into the State Department, as President Trump had been previously suggesting Thousands of workers may have lost their jobs, and tens of thousands of contractors are no longer being paid. On Monday, Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced that he is now the acting administrator of USAID. He criticized it for failing to prioritize U.S. national interests and instead acting like a, quote, global charity. He also criticized the agency for not falling in line with State Department directives and being insubordinate. Here he is talking to reporters.
It's supposed to respond to policy directives of the State Department, and it refuses to do so.
Rubio clarified that this move isn't about ending the programs, but aligning the org's work, which is paid for with taxpayer money, with the Trump administration's goals. USAID is the largest provider of food assistance around the world and manages more than $40 billion in annual foreign aid to alleviate poverty, treat diseases, and respond to natural disasters in over 100 countries. It had more than 10,000 employees before this weekend's cuts. It was established in 1961 under President John F. Kennedy as the government's humanitarian arm. The announcement came after USAID headquarters in Washington was closed Monday. The entrance to the offices reportedly covered in yellow police tape and blocked by officers. Employees were told via email to stay home. Meanwhile, thousands of workers reported being locked out of the agency's computer systems. Democratic lawmakers opposing the Trump administration's actions gathered outside of the Washington headquarters Monday. They tried to enter the building, but they didn't get far. Basically just to security, and were then turned away. So a bit anticlimactic there, I guess, right, Moshe?
I was waiting for the Democratic members of Congress to rush security and run through the building, but they didn't do that. None of them, it appears, were willing to risk arrest yesterday.
They're just like, okay, we can't get in. All right.
We tried. The cameras are here. They saw.
Democratic Senator Andy Kim from New Jersey started his career in public service at USAID. He went to the headquarters and said that there were security guards preventing people from entering. He also said Congress would work hard to prevent the organization's shutdown. Here he is talking to reporters outside of the building on Monday.
What is happening here is illegal. It is unacceptable to have a president try through executive power be able to reorganize or remove USAID. This is an entity that was created through federal statute, codified through federal statute, and something that cannot be changed, cannot be removed except through actions of Congress. So the idea that they are moving forward in this way without any notification to us about trying to change federal statute, just shows how much of a power grab this is. So
it's not clear how much Democrats can really do here because they're in the minority in the Senate and in the House. Now, in the Senate, the minority party still has some control, and that's why you saw yesterday Democratic Senator Brian Schatz of Hawaii declared that he will now place a blanket hold on all State Department nominees until the Trump administration ceases its actions against USAID. That's the thing in the Senate. Literally one senator can place a hold on nominees. It's something we told you about last year when Tommy Tuberville was holding up all those promotions in the U.S. military over an abortion issue he had over at the Pentagon. Nonetheless, Elon Musk just taking to X, writing things like USAID is a ball of worms. You must get rid of the whole thing. It is beyond repair. It leaves a lot of people around the world, Jill, in a very tough situation. USAID workers on official travel are stuck. The systems are down. Their bosses have been fired. They don't have access to email. It's unclear, can they even get home? How are they going to get home? And so just a lot of issues here with just how sudden and how drastic this takeover was. A reminder that the U.S. government has multiple tools when it comes to foreign policy. The Pentagon, obviously the military, the State Department, diplomacy, and USAID since the 60s has always been semi-autonomous, technically falling in line with the State Department. But you heard there, Marco Rubio, sometimes USAID does its own thing. Because ultimately it's a humanitarian arm, and sometimes they're helping people in places that are not necessarily friendly to the U.S. because they're thinking that ultimately, big picture, that this will benefit things. And that's why there's always been this sort of tug of war here. And there have been Democratic administrations. I mean, there was a time where Hillary Clinton, when she was Secretary of State, was talking about getting better control of USAID under the State Department. The criticism here of this drastic cut and any cuts to USAID is that who's going to fill the gap globally? China. And China is going to give aid to poorer countries and ultimately build a better relationship with them. And that ultimately, when people around the world who are starving or facing issues see a bag of rice or whatever is coming from the U.S. with the U.S. flag on it, that has an impact. And that's what the argument is from USAID. At the same time, the British, a couple of years ago, under their conservative leadership, folded their development agency into the foreign ministry and haven't looked back. And so there is precedent for this. This has just been the way things are organized. Now, USAID people will tell you that this will make things challenging, that State Department isn't equipped to run what they do. The State Department says, you guys go rogue sometimes, and so we want to keep you more in-house. Regardless, even if you agree the place needs reform, some people take issue with the fact that this is not the way to do it. Firing everybody, ending the contracts, literally measles nets going across Africa right now with no one to pick them up anymore. This whole overnight turnover by Elon Musk and team, not the way to do it. And there's a lot of programs related to HIV and AIDS, humanitarian assistance in war zones, places like Ukraine and other places, Congo, other places around the world. There's medication, life-saving medication that goes to pregnant women and children that is now unable to reach certain villages in Zambia because basically they were driven there by USAID trucks. Those drivers have been fired. Clinical trials for medications across South Asia, Africa, Latin America have all been suspended. And by the way, this is not just foreign. Here at home, the USAID Food for Peace program actually brought in 1 million tons of food from U.S. farmers as part of its efforts to provide food assistance around the world. So it actually, farmers here make money off of USAID.
Yeah, in 2023 alone, the U.S. government spent about $68 billion of foreign aid. Roughly $44 billion of that was dispersed through USAID to 160 countries across the globe. In total, though, the U.S. spends less than 1% of its federal budget on foreign aid, a smaller percentage than the average wealthy nation. Trump's allies have called some of the USAID spending radical and unjustified. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt spoke to the media about what she says are some of its most outrageous expenditures. A couple of smaller budget items she mentioned. $1.5 million to advance DEI in Serbia's workplaces, $70,000 for a DEI musical in Ireland, $47,000 for a transgender opera in Colombia, $32,000 for a transgender comic book in Peru. But because the USAID website is down, it's actually pretty tough to fact check these claims.
Yeah, we're waiting on more details from the White House. Remember the claim last week that $50 million was set to go for condoms in Gaza for Hamas. They still haven't provide any evidence that was actually a program, and there's nothing in the U.S. budget that said that. But nonetheless, there have been controversial programs by USAID. And this is a big thing by Trump, but ultimately, overwhelmingly, they would argue that most of the money is going to these larger causes related to the impoverished, children, etc. But more accountability is needed. The question is, how do you get there? Is this the way to get there? Now, again, the Trump people would argue previous attempts at reform got hung up in Congress, and this is the way we got to do it to make change and make change quickly, even if it is a little ugly and people are suffering in the process. They point to the fact that legitimate aid got into the wrong hands. In November, the agency sent out a press release confirming that a Syrian national had been charged with taking more than $9 million in U.S. humanitarian aid meant for Syrian civilians. So there have been examples, and we heard from people in the Mo News community who were like, yeah, I saw U.S. aid getting into the hands of terrorist groups around the world. Again, the USAID folks would say this is the cost of doing business in those parts of the world. The Trump people saying, no, we need more accountability, and putting this under the State Department is the way to go. Nonetheless, chaos for people at USAID, people not sure whether they have jobs, people stuck around the world. We'll see what happens with all that. But one thing people are pointing to is this a sign of things to come? Are they basically using USAID as the first sort of run through of how to take apart other agencies they don't like in the federal government? We've told you about Trump's plans to abolish the education department. The Wall Street Journal was out with a story yesterday saying that previous attempts to abolish the department have not worked. You got to go through Congress. Congress officially creates departments and abolishes departments. what they're looking at, sort of like USAID, is what if we take it apart from the inside and not officially abolish it? Is that something we can do here? So they are looking at potentially moving education department functions to other departments in the interim, not going for the whole abolish education department, but taking apart various things. One of the questions coming up here is Linda McMahon. She faces a confirmation hearing. She's the former WWE executive, married to Vince McMahon, who's going to be the education secretary, was nominated for education secretary here. We'll see if she gets through in the Senate. But the question is whether they're going to hold up that nomination if this stuff starts to happen. And so maybe they're going to slow roll any education department changes until after she gets confirmed to try to ensure she gets through Congress. Nonetheless, it's out there now in the Wall Street Journal. Everyone's watching what's happening at USAID. And so a question as to whether it'll stop there or whether they'll allow it to continue or whether they'll allow the administration to continue to do it. Remember that, the two places where things get held up, Congress and the courts. And so you can expect potential lawsuits here. Right now, Congress Republicans are very much in line with what Trump is doing, even if it means that they're giving up certain controls Congress has, authority that Congress has. And so we'll see what happens. For those of you who've asked, what is Elon Musk's role here? He's just like this guy who's really rich. What's he doing around the government? Well, on Monday, the White House clarified that he's been designated a, quote, special government employee by Trump. That means he has an email address, he has office space in the White House complex. And so this goes beyond his role at Doge. Officially, special government employees typically work up to 130 days. So we'll see what comes after 130 days here. But that was the clarity. And Trump was asked about Musk multiple times in the past 48 hours, where he said, listen, sometimes I disagree with him, sometimes I agree with him, but I've let him roll here and do his thing. And I like what he's doing.
Okay, time for the speed read from NPR. A big visit to the White House today. President Trump is meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu today at the White House. He is the first world's leader to meet with Trump since his inauguration. The meeting comes a day after negotiations started for the second phase of a ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas, in which negotiators hope that both sides can agree on an end to the war in Gaza and the return of all of the Israeli hostages from captivity. There are still about 80 hostages being held by Hamas. Trump and Netanyahu are set to talk about that deal, which Trump has said he is hell-bent on getting, despite rocky relations between the two parties during the first phase of the deal. And Moshe, Steve Witkoff is slated to be part of this meeting. And he's been getting universal praise from many Israelis and also Palestinians. He visited Gaza the last time he was in the region. And a lot of Israelis who have been critical of Netanyahu feel like he's been pushing him to make some concessions that he wouldn't normally make.
Yeah, well, Witkoff, not a typical diplomat, a real estate guy, friends with Trump going back. They played a lot of golf together, but ultimately he's been put in charge of the Middle East portfolio here, sort of like what Jared Kushner had in the first term when he, Trump's son-in-law, married to Ivanka. So Witkoff been shuttling back and forth there, trying to make progress. They want the ceasefire to last here. The Qataris have also announced, hey, we expect you, Trump, to make hold the Israelis to the second part of the deal. Now, it's going to lead to some difficult exchanges here because ultimately Hamas probably going to demand even more for the remaining hostages. And the question is, will the Israelis be willing to do that? Can Netanyahu's government and the folks on the right wing of his government allow him to do that? Or will he face certain political issues internally there? You also have from Trump, he's a deal guy. He tends to be a deal guy. And so he's trying to get the Saudi Arabians to make a huge peace deal with the Israelis here. The Saudi Arabians, this is what has been deemed the grand bargain of the Middle East. If you can get Israel and Saudi Arabia to have a peace deal, that opens things up after 80 plus years of war. Nonetheless, the Saudis are demanding a path to a Palestinian state. They want very specific concessions from the Israelis here. Also, to be discussed, what we've told you about Trump's plan to have million plus Palestinians who don't have homes right now in Gaza relocate to Egypt and Jordan. Those countries have rejected that idea. Trump is pushing them to take it. Based on what we're seeing, maybe he's got tariffs in store, Jill. It seems to be a tactic Trump has had here. The other thing he has is aid, the billions in aid that goes to Jordan and Egypt. I believe we also have tanks that are built in Jordan. So he's got certain cards he can pull on those countries. Nonetheless, a lot to be discussed, and we'll watch those headlines over on Instagram today.
From the Wall Street Journal, climate change is expected to cause a decline in U.S. home values by about $1.5 trillion by 2055. The climate research company First Street said the decline will come from rising home insurance costs and also people avoiding neighborhoods in risky areas. Moshe, what isn't a risky area at this point? The relationship...
Minnesota, Jill, Minnesota.
The relationship between climate and home prices has come under increasing scrutiny in the fallout of recent natural disasters like January's wildfires in Los Angeles and the hurricanes that destroyed the southeast U.S. last fall. And I say that because Hurricane Helene this past summer did so much damage to Asheville, North Carolina, which is not really someplace that you would expect would be hit by hurricanes.
Yeah, ultimately this hurricane that came up through Florida did its worst damage in the mountains of Tennessee and Western North Carolina there. So ultimately, with climate change, unpredictable things are happening everywhere. Among the places that this study says you will see rising home insurance costs, significant population declines is the prediction. Fresno County, California, Ocean County, New Jersey, and Monmouth County, New Jersey, among the places. There's also other parts of the country like Houston, Miami, Tampa, but given that there's other factors drawing people there, they think people will swallow these higher home insurance costs to continue to live there. And so one of the interesting things related to all of this is this doesn't take into account how inflation or other factors could increase home prices. So while this top line number sounds significant, $1.5 trillion, ultimately this could be a small percentage overall if housing prices continue to go up, which I guess is sort of bad news and good news. But ultimately, there are a number of factors here that impact home prices, but climate's certainly a big one. And, I'm still hearing from friends in Southern California where home insurance was already difficult enough, getting expensive enough. And this most recent round of fires, you have a lot of insurers who are like, we're not getting involved in this anymore. Like we're out. And so you see that on the West Coast, you see that on the East Coast, you see that on the Gulf Coast, the Gulf of America coast, right? You see Tornado Alley moving to the south, from the Midwest, but then suddenly the Midwest and the Plains still also getting that. So continued challenges across the board. And as we, look at the housing market, it's just insurance, the latest challenge that continues to drive up prices.
Back to Washington from CNBC, President Trump on Monday signed an executive order to establish the U.S.'s first sovereign wealth fund. A sovereign wealth fund is a state-owned investment vehicle commonly funded by revenues from natural resources like oil and gas. These funds are used to manage budget surpluses or excess resource revenues, gaining money for the future benefit of the country. Examples include Norway's government pension fund Global and Saudi Arabia's public investment fund, which is reported to have $925 billion in assets.
Yeah, interesting announcement there by Trump. Among the aims of this fund is to create like a fund for developing infrastructure like airports and highways across the country, extending its influence across the world and building various things. Trump is very ambitious here and sees an opportunity to also create an investment vehicle here. So the U.S. isn't always taking out funds, driving ourselves further into debt and finding a way to, use the money within the U.S. Treasury to create more of a fund to do other things with. So still pretty open-ended here. But potentially, if this works out, it could make the U.S. government less dependent on issuing Treasury debt to raise money here. Will be interesting to see how it's funded. Most significantly, what are we going to do with the money right away? Well, Trump says this fund, it's going to take a while to stand up here, but could be part of the deal to acquire a stake in TikTok. He very much wants to keep TikTok around and ultimately wants the U.S. government to have part ownership of it. And so he brought in that idea yesterday. So we'll monitor that.
Okay, and let's talk some entertainment, shall we? From the Associated Press, on the heels of her big Grammy win Sunday night, Beyoncé announced her 2025 Cowboy Carter tour dates. The tour kicks off in Los Angeles on April 28th, and it wraps up in Atlanta on July 11th. Tickets go on sale for the general public starting on February 14th. On Sunday, Beyoncé became the first Black female artist to win Best Country Album.
Yes, and a big moment, if you were watching, sure, it was not an accident. They had Taylor Swift awarding Best Country Album. And so basically a rare moment of Taylor and Beyoncé, 9 p.m. Eastern time, live TV on stage together, briefly for that moment on Sunday night.
And Beyoncé also took home Album of the Year for the very first time with 35 wins and 99 nominations. She is the most awarded and most nominated artist in Grammy history, but she'd never won the big prize. Last year, if you remember, her husband, Jay-Z, actually called out the Grammys because Beyoncé had never won Album of the Year, despite being the most awarded artist. Moshe, a lot of people on social media, very critical, saying that that is why Beyoncé won. As we know, a lot of these awards and the ceremonies are pretty political.
Yeah, I don't have visibility into the Recording Academy, but a source tells me that Jay-Z was going to issue a tariff against the Recording Academy if she didn't get Album of the Year.
25%
And like
tariff.
I was going to say, Jay-Z's a billionaire. He's basically a small country at this point. What's the line? He's not a businessman. He's a business man. Yeah, Jay-Z was going to issue a 25% tariff against the Grammys if they didn't give her Album of the Year. And so that is my understanding as to why she got it last night.
So you agree with it?
You know, at this point, whatever. She already had 35 Grammy Awards, so give her the Album of the Year, call it a day, end that controversy. I didn't scrutinize who else was in the category, though, in their album, Jill.
I'm not really a good judge because I'm not really familiar with a lot of the albums that were nominated. And
I'm looking now. Chappell Roan, right? She won some stuff. Like, that was a good album. Taylor, Tortured Poets Department, was also up, though that did receive its share of sort of blah from people who are like, it felt too similar to previous albums. Billie Eilish, Charlie XCX, and Sabrina Carpenter were in that category. So, you know, relatively competitive category there, but maybe they just wanted to get that whole drama off their backs.
I say deserving. And I will say the one thing about Beyoncé is that she still puts together an album. We've talked about how, you know, Spotify and streaming has just changed the way that we consume music in general, where we don't listen to these albums front to back. But Beyoncé does make an effort, I think, still to record these albums with the idea of being really thoughtful about the order of songs and the way that it plays if you were going to listen to it from beginning to end.
All right. Well,
there's my musical take, Moshe. I say go Beyoncé.
Moving forward, February 2nd, on this day in history, we will mark Beyoncé finally winning Album of the Year. But for now, the date is now February 4th. So on this day in history, we begin here in 1801. John Marshall becomes the first. John Marshall takes office as the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, a position he would hold for a record 34 years. Fast forward to on this day in 1861, in Montgomery, Alabama, there's a meeting between South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, and Louisiana. They convene to establish the Confederate States of America. In the fall of 1860, Abraham Lincoln had been elected. A bunch of states began to secede, saying, this guy, we don't want to be in a country anymore with him and his goals and agenda. And so in the transition period of Abraham Lincoln waiting to be inaugurated in March, you see basically a whole bunch of states secede, the creation of the Confederate States of America. So he basically is elected president at a time where there's still the United States of America. And by the time Lincoln is inaugurated, several months later, half the Union almost is gone. All right, we fast forward to the 20th century. On this day in history, in 1974, newspaper heiress Patty Hearst, 19 years old at the time, was kidnapped in Berkeley, California by the Symbionese Liberation Army. Amazing if you ever want to get into sort of the wild stories of the 70s there, these sort of domestic terror groups, cults, Charles Manson, etc. Key date there, the Patty Hearst kidnapping. All right, some tech news here. On this day in 2000, the computer video game The Sims launches, so 25 years old today. 21 years ago today, old enough to drink today, Facebook. On this day, a Harvard student named Mark Zuckerberg launches the Facebook. Some of you might recall it used to be called thefacebook.com, shortened to Facebook. Fast forward, hundreds of billions of dollars later, it's Meta. They got Instagram. He's growing his hair out. He's at the inauguration. All got started 21 years ago today.
For whatever reason, when I think of Mark Zuckerberg, the only image that ever pops up in my head is him covered in that white, is him covered in just that white suntan lotion.
Oh, the sunscreen. Some people have that. Some people think about the Jesse Eisenberg character in Social Network. He's been a cultural figure here for 2 decades since creating Facebook out of his dorm room.
I actually think he's never looked better, to tell you the truth. I like the long hair. I'm into it. I like the long hair.
The new look, Mark.
Yeah.
Well, I know we have a bunch of Meta employees and people in that space who listen to this podcast, so maybe somebody will let him know. All right. Fast forward here on this day in 1982. All right, an amazing guitar intro. Stevie Nicks, Edge of 17, came out 43 years ago today. Jill, if that guitar intro sounds familiar to some folks, it comes from Edge of 17, but basically it's also used by Beyoncé in Bootylicious. She does a version of it. And so she sampled it effectively, but love the beginning of Edge of 17.
Moshe, despite hearing both of those songs numerous times, I never put 2 and 2 together until this podcast.
If you ever play Name That Tune, people would be forgiven for guessing the wrong song, right? Now the Bootylicious version is slightly slower, by a hair. Anyway, I digress, but you can check it out on your Spotify after this podcast. And I guess we'll leave it there, Jill.
All right. That is a wrap. Thank you guys for listening to the Mo News Podcast. If you like what you hear, share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And throw us a kind review in the App Store. We'd appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody. It's early February. We thought January was a long month. We're here with you to take you through this month.
Moshe, I feel like we're almost done with February. we're cruising through it.
We're on the 4th day. The first day of February began with tariffs. So we'll see how all of this shakes out. But every day is a roller coaster ride. It feels like these days.
All right. Bye, everyone.